Alright guys, thank you for joining me. This is my second video. Today we are going to talk about the central figure of Christianity, Jesus Christ. And we are going to look at what proof there is that he actually walked the earth and was a physical being. This is very important because, as you know, this is the basis of all of Christianity. So let's take a look. So the first evidence we're going to look at is the earliest writings of Christianity. That comes from Paul. So the way we can use this as evidence is that Paul actually walked on earth the exact same time Jesus was around. However, there's nothing in the Bible that indicated they ever actually met. So the way you're probably asking yourself, well, how is this evidence that Jesus actually lived? Well, Paul writes on a couple of occasions about meeting with Jesus' brother James. So the reason why this is important is because obviously Paul's readers could verify if there was actually a person named James. So the likelihood that Paul would make up a person that would be pretty easy to verify if they're a real person or not, that's pretty much slim to none. Now the next bit of evidence might be controversial to people watching this video that are not Christians because this is directly from the Bible. It's obviously the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, these were people that pretty much they were his closest friends. They knew him on a personal basis. Now, if you don't believe in the Bible, that's not going to mean a lot to you. But you got to take all the evidence and lump it together as one. So we're not going to ignore the Gospels and pretend that they don't exist. These were his closest friends. The Gospels were finished a couple of decades after Jesus died. So very, very easily, these people, even if you're a skeptic, they could have very easily known, been friends with, and walked hand in hand with Jesus Christ. So even if you don't believe in the Bible, that's a little bit more proof that, that a lot of people are talking about this guy named Jesus, and he seems pretty important. Now, there are some issues when we talk about the Gospels that I've seen skeptics point out. A couple of things. Why did they take so long to write? Why didn't they write stuff down sooner? Why are there inconsistencies? I think, first of all, inconsistencies in the Gospels shows, to me at least, that they were recounting their own personal experiences. They were not lying. Reason being is that they were writing these over the course of 2 decades, 3 decades, something like that. And if you're going to recount an experience from your life from 20, 30 years ago, you're probably going to have slightly different remembering than the person standing right next to you that probably experienced the exact same thing. On the flip side of that, if you're trying to come up with a fabrication or you're making up a lie, you're going to probably want to sit down with the other people and make sure your stories line up XYZ to the T. I mean, you're going to make sure every single point matches. So the fact that there are inconsistencies, at least for me, doesn't change anything. In fact, it kind of verifies to me that they were recounting their own personal stories. The next thing is, why did they take so long? Why didn't they write stuff down sooner? They could have written stuff down sooner. I mean, this isn't like they had a USB drive they could have saved everything on. Things got destroyed. There was a lot of turmoil. People went into hiding because there was a big martyrdom problem. The other thing I've seen is, at the time, the apostles might not have seen the need to write things down because in their mind, Jesus was going to be coming back. In fact, the church, like they say, a lot of great artists, they're not appreciated during their time. The church really took off after Jesus had died. So maybe they thought, everybody already believes in Jesus. This has taken off. So what's the point of writing this down? It wasn't until a lot of those early followers started to die, either from natural causes or martyrdom, that maybe they thought, wow, we really need to get this stuff written down so people know exactly what happened. The other thing is they might have just prioritized not trying to get killed. Like I said, martyrdom was going on back then. Christians were persecuted. A lot of them probably went into hiding. In fact, a lot of them did go into hiding. So, fear for your life is obviously you're going to push, writing down this story or this remembrance. You're going to push that back. And it just wasn't really easy to write back then. Here's something I found very interesting that I kind of funny to me. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, Hobbit nerd. It took Tolkien, from his own children's mouths, it took him 7 to 8 years to finish writing The Hobbit. The Hobbit is the most basic of his work. Way more generic than Lord of the Rings, way more generic than the Silmarillion, all of that stuff. Way, way more generic. 7 to 8 years to write it. That's with a typewriter. Imagine how hard it would be to write the Gospels and all the details and the length of the Gospels all the way back then when writing, it just really wasn't that simple. So the fact that it took a couple of decades, really, to me, is not that surprising. So now the question comes, what if we completely ignore the writings of Paul in the Gospels? What other actual proof is there that a man named Jesus walked the earth? Well, our first bit of evidence is a man by the name of Cornelius Tacitus, or Tacitus, Tacitus. Don't know how to pronounce it necessarily. He was a Roman senator and orator. He hated Christians. But one of the cool things about him is he was one of, if not the most trusted and respected historian of that time. His last major work, called the Annals, he speaks of Nero. At the time, Nero was suspected of having burnt down large portions of a town because he had some building projects in mind. Tacitus tried to shift the blame to the Christians because, again, he hated the Christians. In doing so, he wrote this: "Therefore, to put down the rumor, Nero substituted as culprits and punished the most unusual ways those hated for their shameful acts, whom the crowd called Christians. The founder of this name, Christ, Christus in Latin, has been executed in the reign of Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate." Pontius Pilate is the man in the Bible that, passes Jesus off to the mob to basically be killed. So, like a lot of historians at the time, he did not divulge who his sources were. Many historians have their own theories about who his sources were. However, during that time period, he probably sat through a lot of trials prosecuting and persecuting Christians. So he would have been privy to knowledge of such things that had happened over the course of time. He would not have published something he heard without getting verification and hearing it from many sources. He got to the level he got to in the Roman government from being trustworthy. He was not, like they say nowadays, fake news. He would not publish or say something like that without knowledge. Now, the last bit of evidence we have is a Jewish priest named Josephus. He was a Jewish priest that was arrested by the Romans, later was released by the Romans and put under their protection. He was considered a traitor by the Jews. However, he kept entrenched in his Jewish beliefs. Ended up changing his name to Flavius Josephus. Basically, he is important because one of his last pieces of work was something called the Jewish Antiquities. And in this, he does not reference Jesus much, but he does. And he also references James, Jesus' brother. This is worth noting because he specifies the James and Jesus he is talking about. These were very common names back then, so he went one step further to make sure people knew who he was talking about. He says James, who's the brother of Jesus, who is called Messiah. The reason why that's important is, as you know, the Jews did not believe Jesus was the Messiah. So the fact that he wrote that down meant that a lot of people were talking about this guy, and he was kind of a big deal. And it's also worth noting that Josephus did not bring up James or Jesus for that reason. He brought them up entirely simply because he was talking about the judge named Ananus, who was losing his powers as the high priest for passing James, the brother of Jesus, off to be stoned to death. So basically, to wrap this up, it's important because, one, he specifically references that James and that Jesus, and he takes it one step further to make sure people know who he's talking about. And also, his entire writing had really nothing to do with Jesus. It was more about Ananus, the judge, the high priest, and James. So again, pretty interesting to me at least. So now when we're talking about Josephus and Cornelius Tacitus, I will openly admit neither one of them actually ever physically met Jesus. I get that. But their writings and accounts around that time verify some simple truths that we are told. This is a man that walked the earth. This was a man that impacted many, many people. This was a man that was crucified. He was crucified under the watch of Pontius Pilate. So a lot of these things, while they never met him, pretty coincidental, and it's got to speak highly that they actually think that this man lived. Now, one other thing when we are looking at this whole debate, did he live or didn't he live? One thing I found very, very interesting, I was reading it on a sociology webpage, and I never thought about it, but it is very, very interesting to me at least, if you think about all the great movements in history, and I'm not talking about just religion, but you can look at Buddhism and Islam, whatever. Let's look at other things: Nazism, socialism, the Manson family, the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, the Jonestown mass suicide. What do all of these movements or cults or social uprisings, what do they all, the civil rights movement is another great example. What do they all have in common? There is one central figure behind them. You can look at any of these movements and say, you know what, that one person was kind of the person that got it off the ground. And it's true. So if we're going to sit there and say Christianity became the world's largest religion, it survived the test of time, and we're just going to ignore this simple fact that we're going to basically have to go out on a limb and say, you know, this is the one great movement, maybe the greatest movement of all time, that just did not have a central figure. That was a complete lie. To take, and pardon my pun here, but you're going to have to take a pretty big leap of faith to come to that conclusion. All right, so wrap this up. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've laid everything out there for you. I understand that if you're an atheist, you're probably looking at this saying, you know, I don't believe in Paul's writings. I don't believe in the Gospels. You know, those two people you talked about never physically actually met him. So, you know, really at the end of the day, what proof do you have? Well, like I said, we've laid it all out. There's some coincidental things out there. So you make your own conclusion. I will be interested to hear your comments below, you know, what you took from this. If you find it interesting, what are your overall thoughts on Jesus and, you know, being a historical figure, especially if you're an atheist. Comment below. I will be very curious. And thank you for spending some time with me today. Guys, I just want to say thank you for taking a few moments to watch my video today. Please comment below. I plan to make a lot of these videos, so anything you can think of that has pushed people away from the church or gotten them to outright reject God. Anything and everything, nothing's off the table, so do comment. If you found the video interesting, please do like, subscribe, and share. I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you and have a good day, y'all.